Can you just say Brian after 3?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
So 1, 2, 3.
Brian.
Oh my God. Why the delay? Right. Anyway.
Brian,
sorry, because I just realized there was like another region on that track. So then I had to stop it and now I had to sync. And oh God, Brian, I'm so sorry. Anyway, enjoy your t-shirt. He also sent me a picture yesterday. He sent me a picture of him wearing the t-shirt and he was like, oh yeah, I must send it to you. He was like, oh yeah, the t-shirt is brilliant. It fits perfectly, but he got some jeans off eBay that were meant to be athletic fit with extra roomy thighs, right? And I swear to God, they look like they've been sprayed onto his legs. So I would imagine they're going back. Right. So anyway, let's do it. So I'll just got my things open. Okay.
Great start.
Okay, welcome to the Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. It's episode 67, and we're still in Kyushu, and we're still on the 9th of February, 2024, and we're still on the same day that we left you on in episode 66. So we're going to be picking up the reins from having left Adams in Fukuoka. But before we head to the next joint, James, how are you this week?
I am unchanged since last week. I'm pretty unchanged. Things kind of slowed down a little here. I'm not sure. I think it's the onset of everybody's favorite rainy season in Eastern Japan. It just leads you to feeling, you just know that humid, as they say in Japanese, darui feeling where you're just completely lacking in spirit and energy. So it's kind of been one of those weeks.
Goodness, what a bright start. Okay, so anyway, moving on. Well, look, we as I said earlier, there we left it off at Adams, which had been something bordering on a religious experience for us both. So we're in Fukuoka Station, and our next destination is actually a place that we've been to before, and we talked extensively about in a previous podcast. Also in Kyushu, of course. But this time we were going in very different circumstances, right? Because famously, you featured or focused on this place in the essay in Tokyo Jazz Joint's book, which was called One Last Stop, and it was the one last stop of a fairly intense and fairly hectic day, right? Back in 2018.
Maybe the most, actually. Well, although this day could rival it, as we'll get to in the next upcoming episode. But yeah, I mean, what else can you say but that it's one of those jazz kisa that's one of the temples, basically, of the whole jazz kisa world in Japan, and undoubtedly one of the highlights of any jazz fan's trip. We've recommended it to a lot of people who've, basically said, look, if you're in the country for a couple weeks, you have to get down south and visit Coltrane, because there is, and I know that I am been accused of speaking in hyperbole or having a very endless top 10 list of places that includes 40 different pieces, but this is a top 10 joint, and there's really literally nothing like it. Coltrane in Tosu City. Just a short ride outside of Fukuoka, maybe 20 minutes. It's technically in Saga Prefecture, so it's kind of like right over the border, but it's basically a suburb of Fukuoka. Just celebrated its 40th anniversary. And, Philip, so I had been back in between since when you and I visited in 2018. Oh, yeah. So, and I'd had an afternoon there, which I think, maybe just mentioned very briefly in a previous episode. And that day it was interesting because being there on my own, not having to rush, I remember just, they didn't remember me, and I didn't mention it until I left that I had been there before, but I was just observing, and what I remember so much from that visit was, it was the afternoon, so I had a cup of coffee, and Harasan, the master, was there sitting with what was obviously a very old friend of his, and they were watching the baseball on TV. It was muted because they were still playing records. And you know me, that's just, I mean, what would be better for me than sitting in a jazz key? So you've got the baseball and the great tunes on. And the two of these old guys just talking baseball for like about an hour, you know? So it was just a wonderfully relaxed afternoon. And, but in some ways, you know, it was a little bit unfulfilling because I didn't really get the chance to interact too much. So I think on our visit together, it was a whole different ball game. And, you know, from the minute we went in and sort of sat down, I could sense that this was going to be, you know, sometimes you just get those feelings, this kind of instinctual feelings like, oh, this is going to be memorable.
Well, obviously, the last time, we'd been hightailing. If you've heard that episode, we were sort of hightailing in a car, and we'd kind of called and pleaded for them to not close before we got there. And we got there, I think, you know, sort of with about 20 minutes before closing at 11 p.m. So this was a little more relaxed. It was around. It was actually still around 5 o'clock, 5:40 or so. I've got because I can see there's a couple of shots of you taking a shot of Coltrane, and the sun starting to set. But we took a fairly leisurely walk from the station, and we've talked before as well. You know, it's one of those places that Tulsa is not much to speak of in terms of a destination, and you know, it's a kind of a long and not unpleasant walk along what used to be a river, and you know, there's a lot of residential buildings and so on. There's a big stadium, and then you suddenly have this kind of huge 3-story kind of wooden building that just like rises out of the suburb and painted in that very distinct kind of pistachio-y green color with Coltrane's face on the side, and I mean, for me, it was just a thrill to go.
But surrounded by nothing, it's just so unusual because, you know, we've often talked about how, you know, how narrow the streets here in Japan are, in urban Japan, or even sometimes in small towns, and things are so close together. And for whatever reason, Coltrane sort of stands alone. It's got its own little parking lot, and if you view it from that part where I was taking a picture of, it looks like it's just by itself. Again, giving it that kind of like almost church-like feeling, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it was a thrill for me to go back because, and I think, you know, when we recorded some reflections afterwards, I was listening back to those this morning, and I had mentioned this as we were heading back to the station in the evening, and I think, like, you know, it only really occurred to me when we went in, you know, how many photos from Coltrane were actually, you know, ended up in the final edit for the book. And also, I think, having just been looked at those photos for so many times and so much recently, and often the owner, the picture of Harasan, the owner, putting on a record in the record booth, was picked up by a lot of the media when they used it for different reviews and things like that. So I felt so close to those photos, and then to suddenly be back there at that entrance, you know, felt really, really surreal. And actually in 2018, when we'd gone the previous day and it was closed. So I'd photographed it then we came back the following day and photographed it again. And then this time we got in, and obviously to come back now. But I mean, what was probably different about this occasion was I had a copy of the Tokyo Jazz Journal's photo book in my bag. And so when we came in, actually, initially, Harasan was sitting by the counter. His wife, who immediately noticeably is no longer dyeing her hair, and of course, again in my head there was this very clear image of them when I photographed them in 2018. I had that lovely portrait of them that's hanging up in Rhinoceros in Berlin, and you know, he looks a little younger, and she. To be honest, kind of looks almost the same, but the one difference that you notice is that her hair is not colored anymore. So she had gray hair. So you immediately kind of get that sense that like a little bit has happened and like time has moved on a little bit. So we came in, sat more or less around the same place that we sat before. And, you know, he didn't really get up or anything like that. And then as we began to talk to them, of course, we realized that, you know, there were reasons for that. But I think we mentioned in a previous podcast, and you probably were closer to these kind of rumors and so on, but he was actually closed for a while, right? So I think we talked before about potentially, you know, it closing down. We were kind of worried about that.
Yeah, that's definitely right. I'd heard, and because we've talked about, like, I follow a lot of jazz geeks similar to myself, just post about all their jazz joint visits, in Japanese. And I had seen various people say, yeah, oh, it's too bad I'm down in Kyushu, but it's been closed. I'm not sure why. And then somebody would comment like, oh, yeah, the master's been a bit unwell. But the way that's phrased in both English and Japanese is so vague as to tell you really nothing, because like we've talked about, Philip, a lot of these guys and women are a bit older. Unwell could indicate something very serious. And we know that Hada-san himself, he just turned 81. So getting the chance to sit down, and we were lucky again this trip too. I mean, we were the only ones there when we arrived, I guess before maybe the evening rush, and as soon as you took out the book and presented it to them, it jogged their memory and everything changed. And I wasn't expecting to get 30 minutes of direct conversation with both of them. I thought that they would just be, my memory of them was that they were very polite, but a little bit formal.
Yes.
And so that they would probably be, again, very polite and thankful, but there wouldn't be a lot of beyond that. And instead, we sat down and we not only got effusive thanks about the book, but we got a lot of talk about the history of the place that we were not expecting. So it was, it was just remarkable.
It was incredible. I mean, we were sat halfway down, and if you've been to Coltrane, this will make a lot of sense. But we were sat about halfway down, and he was right at the end of the bar, just with his back to the door where you come in. And like, I remember just feeling like really nervous, and like I sort of approached him with the book, and that's not, that's me completely projecting. It's not like he was intimidating in any way, but I think I started with the kind of the spiel about what we do, and then explained that this book had been published, and then sort of opened it for him, and he started to look through it, and then I said, oh, well, actually there's some photos of Coltrane in here. And I mean, he was just so completely thrilled. And again, and I, at this point I was sort of kneeled down, and I think you came up, and you were kind of stood, and then eventually my knees gave way. So we were both kind of standing, and he was telling us all these stories and sort of flicking through the book at the same time. And then he went into this whole explanation. So, he explained that he'd broken his leg, or he'd broken a bone in his leg. It'd been 40 days, they'd been closed, and then they were reopened. But it was, it was noticeable, right? Because he was sitting, he had a stick there that he was using to walk. Then he, like you say, he just went into this whole history, and we got a lot. I mean, we got obviously the whole story about I think it was his brother working up in Tokyo back in the 50s and bringing back the Charlie Parker record that really kind of changed everything, right? That got him into jazz. And, then there's so many favorite quotes I had from the whole conversation, but one of them around that was, he just likes Hageshi jazz, like violent jazz. And I was just like, yes, like that's exactly, like if anyone asks me in future, it's like, what kind of jazz do you like? I think that the answer has to be just violent jazz, basically, I mean, my favorite
of all of that, and it solved a bit of a mystery, was why it's named Coltrane twice.
Yes, of course.
And he cleared that up, and it made perfect sense. And it's because when the great Coltrane himself was playing in Thelonious Monk's band, and Monk, who was known for maybe, I don't want to say eccentric, because that sounds like it's a criticism, and it's not. He was known to do his own thing, sometimes getting up and dancing, moving around the stage. And at one of the great live recordings they did, you can hear Monk sort of encouraging him on, shouting out, Coltrane, over and over again. And that so impacted Hada-san that's why he decided to name it that. And it was just, I wasn't, again, we weren't egging him on with questions. He was sort of just like, in a way, sharing this with us because we had come and given him the book and shown how much we love it. And it was sort of like, oh, okay, so you guys are really into this stuff. Well, let me just, tell you, because I think we might have asked him one or two questions, but that was about it. In the recording that you did where I'm listening to him, it was mostly him on a monologue,
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, he went on and, again, we've talked, multiple times about this whole thing on the podcast in terms of, what will happen to places and what the future is. And I think, I mean, for me, it's almost kind of like this place, I think, is just, it kind of functions really as a metaphor a little bit for the whole jazz Kisa culture that we've been so involved in kind of documenting and trying to help in our own way to kind of preserve a little bit of. And, because it is just this absolutely unique and incredible place. It just has this huge repository of vinyl and memorabilia and history and stories. And, yet, in front of your eyes, you can see him, physically deteriorating, and he looked older even in that 5 years. Or 6 years, he was moving with a stick. His wife looked a little older too, and you can kind of see that coming to an end. But one of the sort of, I mean, it's bittersweet, I know, but one of the great things to hear from him was that actually we do know what's going to happen to a lot of this stuff. So he explained in a lot of detail, but and I think it was Kami Minami or Miname or somewhere like that. But anyway, as far as we got from him, the story was that there was one of these huge kind of shopping mall areas, and they had basically left or it had gone bust. So there's this area, and the town is kind of taking over this building and turning it into one of these kind of community center / museum / type halls.
These are the kind
Japan.
of buildings that if you've been to Japan or you're living in Japan, you know very well, because they're pretty much everywhere. The kind of white elephant, projects that the government builds, even in towns that don't really need them. They sort of function as a not a city hall, but like a cultural community citizen center. There'll be a library. There'll be a kids area. There might be a small performing space. I mean, you just see them all around Japan. And so basically, yeah, he explained that this was sort of the exit plan for Coltrane because he didn't want. And Philip, what's really interesting is that because obviously, as we talked about last episode and ad nauseum together about me and the Eiga-Kon and sort of taking it over as is, including the record collection. So what I've been doing over the last couple of years is, sort of always asking the owners too, like, what are you going to do with the records? And almost all of them have expressed the same sentiment, which is understandable, that they would prefer that either someone can take the shop over or that they can sell it, the collection as is. They don't like the idea of just breaking it up one by one to hundreds of different collectors who just then hoard it and keep it in their homes, And so the fact that he had already thought of this plan, and he had said that it's definitely going to happen in, within 3 years, so now 2.5 years since we really visited, and that remember, he's got a whole record room there. I mean, a good 4,000 to 5,000 easily.
Oh, it's a huge collection, right?
So you'd have to think that for anyone in the Kyushu region, or even anyone in southern Japan, to have access to that as a sort of a library. I mean, it's invaluable for jazz fans, for people doing research, or even just for people who, are beginning to learn about it, that they can go in and sort of access it. So I was absolutely thrilled to hear it. But like you said, there was that feeling of sort of melancholy, because he clearly knew that, he would probably not be able to run the shop day to day within 2 to 3 years. And so he came up with this, obviously they'd discussed it for a while. And Philip, do you remember, so when he went back to the record room, moving slowly to change records, that Mrs. Hara started to basically tell us in more detail about his physical health, and that she no longer felt comfortable leaving him alone in the shop, because when he fell down, I mean, at that age, it was a very serious injury. And so she was really concerned that, he can't run the shop anymore by himself. So that, she's got to be there with him. And as she was telling us this, I mean, my heart just sank, man. It was just like, jeez.
Yeah. I mean, it was, And there was a lovely quote as well, because, it came out of a conversation we were having, but basically, it sort of ended with the punchline, which was "Futari de wa atari mai," which sort of translates as, I don't know, it just makes perfect sense that it's both of us. So, you get this sense that Coltrane is, it's a couple that run it, I mean, okay, there's a master, and yes, it's his collection and so on, but, it does feel very much like a joint enterprise. And, it's probably worth saying as well, he repeated in, several occasions that 3 years was kind of the exit plan. So, right. That's what he's going to do. And as I understand it, there's going to be wholesale shipment of those records to this place, and one of the deals one of the agreements with that deal is that the records are not broken up, so they're going to be kept as a collection. And we hope also then a lot of this memorabilia and sort of artifacts are going to be kept as well, because the thing about Coltrane is, I mean, along that back wall there's a matchbooks in like 7 different colors from Coltrane. As we said before, the ashtrays, the cups, everything is branded Coltrane, and then there's all the coffee posters and the sauces, pictures and everything.
It's incredible. It's incredible, and also think, what about the building though? Because that again, like we talked about, it's so unique because you cannot really get this anywhere, especially in central Tokyo or Yokohama. But it's excuse me, it's a freestanding structure. You know what I mean? That with that green paint and the huge mural of Coltrane's face on the side of the house. What's going to happen to this now? I know in Japan that generally they just tear things down and rebuild them here for long reasons we don't need to go into because it's really boring. But there's no sense of preservation here for anything that's not a temple, basically. So that building's going to be gone, man. And that's I find that crushing as well.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, look, we've come across these things before, so I suppose sad's maybe not the right word. I mean, it's inevitable, I think, and that's one of the reasons that Tokyo Jazz Joints exists in the first place, because it was always set up to kind of document these places. And for me as a photographer, that's what I wanted to do particularly. But I think what was really amazing about this evening, and we weren't that far in, so we hadn't had too much alcohol either. But I just think it was very, very emotional. I remember, we did continue to talk again. But I do remember after the sort of initial conversation finished, and, I left him with the book, which he then passed to his wife. And actually for a long time, she then sat behind the bar and also flicked through the book meticulously. But I think for me, what was just... when I sat back down at the table with you, I just was genuinely overcome with emotion. I just felt so emotional. And I think what it was just simply that there was this feeling that the whole thing had kind of come full circle in some way. And the purpose was never necessarily to make a book. It was never to bring a book back to places, but just the fact that, we had been to Coltrane 2018. It had been such an epic day, an epic journey. So it was already burned in our kind of collective memory as this incredible experience. And then to be able to photograph it, and not only that, then just produce this book, and then actually have the opportunity to bring that back and to see just how pleased he was. That at that point of knowing that, he's going to have to close and Coltrane is going to come to an end, that it's preserved in that book. And the thing that stuck with me the most was when he said, as we were coming to the end of the conversation before we left, he suddenly was he sort of slapped his knee and he said, and he held up the book and he said, "Korede ashigamata tsuyoku natta," which, translates as just this is going to help my leg get stronger quicker. And I just thought, what an incredible, I don't love reviews, but that's a review. And I mean, it's just an incredible compliment
that's also,
and feeling.
It's also, I think that a lot of that too, especially for you, because remember, you had not been back for a while. You'd not been here since I had received the books 6 months earlier. Yeah. So I had already been passing out several of them. So, I had time. I spent the afternoon at Eagle with Goto-san and took a great picture of him with a beautiful smile. And then Miyazaki-san at Samurai, I gave him his copy, and he true to his personality, asked a lot of quirky, detailed questions about photography and whatnot. And then, of course, Ishizaki-san, our beloved Pithecanthropus, who, again, stayed in character as the Buddha-like character that he is, where he smiled and said, "Oh, thank you. This looks great." So I'd had several of these experiences, to sort of interact with the owners. And so I think that, but those were people that I knew better as well. So it was kind of like, it wasn't quite such a surprise. Maybe they knew that we were doing the project, but being there with you and giving it to Hada-san, again, they had no idea we were coming to visit, had maybe no real recollection of us until we showed them the pictures. You know what I mean? So their reaction being so genuine and so grateful was really touching.
Yeah. I mean, it was just one of those moments for me that will always sort of remain with me, because, and I genuinely, both of us just were kind of, we're never speechless, but we as we were leaving and walking back to the station, there was just that really, that really strong sense of kind of like calm and sort of wonderment at just the whole thing, and how, it is a real privilege to be able to go, for me to go back to Japan, and for us to be able to have the time and the budget to go and do these trips, and just to be able to kind of cap off the experience. And and I did get to show a few of the owners, other owners, over the course of this trip, the book as well, in a few random places. But I think for me, this one was just probably the highlight, and not least because there are, I think, 5 photos of Coltrane that made the cut in the final edit of the book. So it was just a wonderful, wonderful way to return, and something I'll never forget. There was also a few just one little Easter egg as well. I'm just looking at a picture of you wearing that beautiful, beautiful Love Supreme T-shirt that someone made you with the frequency of the 4 tracks on it. I mean, what an incredible design.
Oh yeah, it's funny because I always, that's the one that I always have to explain to people what it is, because they're just like, what are these squiggly lines on your shirt? Like,
see,
it's kind of
that's the genius of the design.
You mean
anyway.
the cryptic one? Yeah.
The cryptic one, yeah. What a designer. Anyway, but over your shoulder, what we noticed was a few images actually of some musicians, and completely out of the blue, we discovered our old friend from way back in 2018 in groovy Yanagawa, notable because not only was it attached to a kind of an Airbnb, to a B&B, but also he had a Rhodes piano hidden under just an absolute mountain of crap, right? Yeah.
He had a Fender Rhodes, and he had a definite Jazz Kisa Hall of Fame mustache. So a very memorable guy, very, very memorable guy. And that was really interesting, Philip, because we know that, a lot of the Kisa owners in any given city or region know each other. And they often know, like, the main ones in Tokyo, because, like we've talked about many times, a lot of these guys spent their college years in Tokyo, especially knowing places like Dig and Doug and Nakadaider Son's influence and whatnot. But that groovy is a very, very, very deep spot, and not the kind of place that you would think even someone in Fukuoka necessarily would know and or even go to. But obviously these guys knew each other and had some sort of interaction with performances. I mean, Coltrane used to host, it still does host gigs.
It was actually hosting one that night, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I remember the guy, when we left, the guy was just coming in to sort of like he was bringing in his saxophone and stuff to getting the sound ready. But in the 70s and the 80s, it was definitely going to be a lot more frequent. So I guess that does make sense that the jazz community would know each other around Kyushu Island. But yeah, because of all the times we had been there, I had never noticed that in the picture at all. So that was
a nice also to see. Actually, in the same selection of photos, there is actually a picture of Hara-san also playing the sax, as a younger man. So yeah, like you say, again, just that sense of kind of community before online communities and before social media and all those things, and they were able to and actually the gig where he's playing the piano, certainly in this photo, is in Coltrane, so obviously they were doing gigs there together. So yeah, like a really nice little thing to find, just as a sort of like a kind of a I don't know, byproduct of the trip. But the other thing as well, I thought was kind of seemed a little poetic to me was the choice of record too, because Harasan, he kind of shuffled off to his record cave, and the album he chose was actually Transition by John Coltrane. It just seemed like, it seemed very fitting because very much in that stage of transition, as is a lot of jazz keys of culture, and it seemed
a favorite, even among of all Coltrane's albums that we love, a favorite of both of ours. So
and he played the Dear Lord track, and it was just a beautiful thing.
Very, very sweet. Yeah.
So look, we thought we would dedicate a whole episode to Coltrane just because it was such a special experience. It's a shorter episode, we know, but we feel like, it kind of just deserved its own because it is such an incredible place.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so special for all the reasons we've outlined, and I think that timing wise, it's just great that we were able to get there when we did. And to have that experience and to see their reaction. As you said, Philip, that's a memory I will never, ever forget. One of the highlights of all of our jazz adventures, And look, we've got, hey, maybe it's a short episode, but the next episode is going to be a bit of a monster because, as you mentioned, so we leave Coltrane, what time? About 5:30-ish, maybe?
Oh, no, 6? It's later than that.
Is it later than that?
So we left about...
There's still a hell of a lot coming on that day that I had forgotten about even. Yeah, because that day doesn't end until about 2 a.m. So the next episode
was a long one.
Go into sort of what occurred afterwards, the good and the bad and the challenges. But no, it was...
But look, it's jazz, really right?
Amazing.
So it's jazz. So, you get a 28-minute episode, you get a 46-minute episode. Sometimes you get an hour 17. Who knows what improvisation is coming? But look, we hope you enjoyed this particular episode. And remember, if you are listening along, more often than not, there's some photos on there just to kind of contextualize what we're talking about, and you can look along on the Instagram feed as well, so you can have a look. And I'll probably end up with that photo of Harasan and Harasan, both of them, the couple, just him sitting, her standing behind him with her arms. Her hands on his shoulder and his arm, and of course he's holding open the copy of Tokyo Jazz Joint's book with the photograph of him in the book, which is just a very meta and really, really satisfying moment from a photography point of view as well. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with episode 68, and as James has already said, we are going to be on a bit of a roller coaster between now and the time that we get back to the hotel, and we're still on day 2 of this little trip to Kyushu. So
I've just got to go dig up those notes from I'm not going to say the name, but from our last stop, because there was definitely some questionable music choices from there.
Yeah, that have it sort of goes downhill from here, right?
A lot of exclamation points and frowny faces in my notes initially, but then it did pick up, if you remember. But anyway, enough spoilers, so we'll get to that next time.
Musically, it takes a dip. Let's be honest. But, we can't have it all, right? Anyway, listen, in the meantime, you look after yourself, and we'll talk soon.
Great chatting as always, buddy. Talk to you soon.
See ya.